Hello Year 9 and welcome to the final chapter of Mice and Men. So today we are going to be looking at chapter 6. So you should have read to the end of the novel. Chapter 6 isn't a very long chapter, and we're going to do a little bit of work to begin with, thinking about the very beginning of chapter 6, because Steinbeck chooses to go back to the very first setting of the entire novel. So we get this symmetry between the opening of the novel and the end of the novel. So we're going to do a little bit of work looking at that, and then we're going to think about some of the kind of bigger questions and ideas of the novel as a whole. Okay, so a little bit like a kind of spot the difference task, you know, where you've got two pictures and you have to spot the things that are different between them. You've got a copy of a short extract from chapter 1 and a short extract from chapter 6. And what you are going to do is you're going to read each of those, and then you need two different colour pens or highlighters, and you're going to, in one colour, highlight the differences. So how have things changed at the pool since the last time that we were there? And then in another colour, you're going to highlight the things that are similar. So this will give us a sense of how Steinbeck is using that setting to create a particular atmosphere. So what I want you to do at this moment is I want you to pause the video, and I want you to do those highlighting of those things that are similar, things that are different. And then what we'll do in the next bit of the video is we'll talk a little bit about some of those things and think about why Steinbeck might have done it. So only move on when you've done your highlighting. Okay, so you should have a lovely highlighted piece of paper in front of you. So let's think about some of the things that perhaps stand out, and more importantly, let's start to think about why Steinbeck does that. So obviously we're back at the same place, we're back at the pool at the river where George and Lenny first stay over on their way to the ranch, and importantly it's also the place where George says to Lenny he's to go if something goes wrong. So obviously we're kind of, as a reader, we're waiting for the arrival of both Lenny and George, because obviously something has gone horribly wrong. So we're kind of waiting for those characters to appear. So if we look at chapter 6, so it's late afternoon. So we're not a million miles from the time that George and Lenny are there. First of all, if you look at this bit down here, it says the day was going fast now. Only the tops of the Galaban Mountains flamed with the light of the sun that had gone from the valley. So it is a similar kind of time. The sun's going down. It's late in the day. However, there's some interesting differences in language. So that bit there, you know, the light flamed with the light of the sun on the mountains. Whereas if you compare that to already the sun had left the valley to go climbing up the slopes of the Galaban Mountains, and the hilltops were rosy in the sun. So it's far more kind of muted in chapter 6. It's not as bright, it's not arguably as beautiful, okay, which again could get us thinking about the kind of atmosphere that Steinbeck's creating. So there's a pleasant shade by the pool. Now, then we get this description of water snake. Now, in both chapter 1 and chapter 6, these descriptions are full of images of nature and animals. And we looked at that when we looked at chapter 1. So this is happening again, but there is a difference between the two. So we had a water snake in chapter 1. A water snake slipped along the pool, its head held up like a little periscope, and that was it. Whereas now, a water snake glided smoothly up the pool, twisting its periscope head from side to side, and it swam the length of the pool and came to the legs of a motionless heron that stood in the shallows. A silent head and beak lanced down and plucked it out by the head, and the beak swallowed the little snake while its tail waved frantically. So what happens to the snake in chapter 6 is that it is eaten, it is killed by a heron. So again, that's setting a very kind of ominous and dark atmosphere for the remainder of the chapter, but it's also foreshadowing what is about to happen. We are about to witness one of the main characters being killed. And the heron is then continuing to kind of wait for other snakes to come along. So that kind of sense of foreboding and that something awful is going to happen doesn't leave. And then what happens is there's this kind of intense rush of wind that comes in chapter 6 here. So a far rush of wind sounded, and a gust drew through the tops of the trees like a wave. The sycamore leaves turned up their silver sides. The brown, dry leaves on the ground scudded a few feet. And row on row of tiny wind waves flowed up the pool's green surface. As quickly as it had come, the wind died and the clearing was quiet again. So there's this really kind of quick and intense rush of energy, which again adds to this kind of atmosphere of expectation, but also it's very ominous that we're waiting for something to happen. So the heron's still standing there waiting, and then Lenny appears, and again he's compared to an animal. He's compared to a bear, like he was in chapter 1, and he came as silently as a creeping bear moves, and he then scares the heron off. The heron pounded the air with its wings, jacked itself clear of the water, and flew off down the river. So hopefully from doing your highlighting and listening to those few points, you've got a real sense of the difference. Chapter 1 starts kind of really peaceful, appreciating the kind of the natural landscape of the river. And, you know, we meet George and Lenny and they're full of hope and they're full of their dream about getting their own piece of land and tending the rabbits. And yet when we come back to this place in chapter 6, it's full of threat and foreboding and the sense that something awful is going to happen. And, you know, their dream has been destroyed. So Steinbeck is reflecting that in the nature around them, the nature of that setting. So in your books or on a piece of paper, I just would like you to have a go at answering these questions. Now, some of these, there's no kind of right or wrong answers to. This is getting you to explore your thoughts and ideas to these kind of bigger questions about the novel as a whole and about the kind of themes and the big ideas. So we've got Lenny in the middle there. Why does the American dream end when Lenny dies? So think about what Lenny represents and the dream that George and Lenny have had together. Why does that disappear when Lenny dies? So you can jot down some ideas for that. If you want to pause at this point and then obviously play the video again once you've got your ideas down, that'll probably be a good idea. So which earlier event in the novel does the mercy killing of Lenny parallel? So we have another mercy killing earlier on in the novel, which we did look at quite closely in some of our previous work. So which event does that kind of link strongly to? And then the symbiotic relationship between George and Lenny is destroyed. So this idea that they're kind of part of a whole, George and Lenny, that they work together, that they depend upon each other in some way. So what the ending of Mice and Men is quite abrupt and it leaves many questions. So what do you think will happen to George now? Do you think he will stay at the ranch? Do you think he will move on? Do you think he will still pursue the idea of owning his own land? What do you think will happen to George? And then the last point I just want you to have a go at answering is, why does George have to be the one to kill Lenny? So George is kind of adamant that he should be the one to kill Lenny. Now think about things that have happened previously in the novel and why he decides he should be the one to kill Lenny. Okay, and then some final few questions. Again, this is not kind of right or wrong answers. This is getting you to explore the kind of bigger ideas and bigger themes of the questions. So what we'd like you to do is just jot down your responses to these questions. They don't have to be, massively long. Kind of 3 or 4 sentences, a paragraph will be absolutely fine. So why does Steinbeck have Slim say, "You had her, George, I swear you had her"? So what is the significance of Slim saying those lines to George, kind of reassuring him that he had to do what he did? He had to kill Lenny. So think about what we've learned about Slim and his role as a character and how the other characters feel about him. and what he represents. So why is it significant that Slim is the one who kind of has to reassure George? So do you think George had a choice in what he did? Be interested to know what you think about that. And what does the title of Mice and Men mean? So if you need some help with that one, we did some work right at the beginning when we looked at the context of the novel, and we looked at the Robert Burns poem, To a Mouse. So obviously you looked at that before reading the novel. So I'd like you to just go back and think about what we learned about that section of the poem, the Robert Burns poem, and how does that link to the kind of big themes and the big ideas and what happens to George and Lenny. So have a go at exploring what you think the title means. So why do you think Steinbeck gave the last line of the novel to a minor character? So the last line of the novel is, you've got them kind of walking back to the ranch, and it says, Curly and Carlson looked after them. So George has gone off with Slim. Slim has said, you had her, George, I swear you had her. Come on with me. He led George into the entrance of the trail and up towards the highway. And then the final line, Curly and Carlson looked after them. And Carlson said, now what the hell you suppose, excuse me, is eating them two guys? So he's basically saying, what's up with them? So why do you think Steinbeck gives the last line to such a minor character? And what effect does that have? We've kind of stepped away from George at this point, and we're seeing the kind of two other men who work on the ranch, kind of, you know, what's up with them? Why are they so miserable? So think about the effect that has. So do you think Lenny's death was inevitable? Do you think that was something that was always going to happen? And explain your answer. And the last one, do you think this novel is pessimistic? So do you think that there is any optimism to be found, anything positive from the end of the novel? Or do you think it is it's incredibly pessimistic? So I would like you to kind of justify your answer for that. So jot your answers down. And that's kind of the end of today's task. Now, there's always optional extension tasks for all the work that we set. So I'm just going to quickly explain what today's extension task is if you want to explore the kind of big ideas of the novel a bit more, because you've all done brilliant. You've all read an entire text novel on your own, so you should be really proud. Well done. So I want to think about, are we happy with the way of Mice and Men ends? Often when we read it normally in school, students kind of express their frustration that it finishes where it finishes, and they want to know more. They want to know more about what happens to George rather than leaving it at that point. So for your extension task, you can consider what could happen in the next chapter. So there was going to be a chapter 7 of Mice and Men, and there's a worksheet that is on class charts that you can use to help you plan and write your own kind of mini chapter 7. But remember to stick to Steinbeck style, so like no zombies or aliens, please. Right, that is the end of today's task. Tomorrow's task, Friday's task for of Mice and Men, is a forms quiz that's going to get you to look at both chapter 6, but also kind of do some review, your kind of own personal review of what you thought of the novel, and also some kind of work on themes and language as well. So well done, Year 9. Thank you very much. Take care.